Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King, as always. I look forward to our Wednesday morning conversations. So, yeah, I can't complain. Things are good.
Absolutely. Same here. And so, as like we begin every day, that's or every Wednesday, every day for me as well, our gratitude moment. What would you say that you're grateful for this morning?
Yeah, so my usual gratitude is for, a refrigerator with food in it, the electricity that makes that possible, indoor plumbing. Those are my basic needs. So, food and hot water and cold water. That's a real blessing. More specifically today, I mean, just looking out, I'm sitting here in the Northeast, and we're fortunate. Yes, we have four distinct seasons, at least that we used to. And spring is blooming now, so everything that was brown is now turning a light green and will gradually get really rich. So it's quite beautiful. And today is a nice day outside, so it's watching the natural world just continue its what it does is beautiful. So I'm grateful for that. And then just moderately healthy. My brain seems to still work. My body functions reasonably well. I have good friends, good colleagues. So in the state of the world, I feel like I'm a pretty fortunate individual.
Excellent, excellent. I know what you mean. I concur with you. My normal gratitude moment always consists of life, health, ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, have sound mind, as well as a mother who's alive, still have a sound mind, still have her gratitude and grace in her spirit, as well as you say, the ability to just recognize nature and the change in the seasons and be grateful for that. A friend of mine sent me a text recently, and there was a text that she had received from her sister, and it was called a toxic positivity mindset. And it was saying that how being positive all the time can be toxic, where you just can't be positive in certain situations. And so she sent that to me to say, what do you think about this as it relates to, how I function in my mindset? And I told her, I said, well, for me, it's not always about being positive. To me, it's always about having gratitude and being grateful and believing that whatever problems that you face, they're solvable. There's a lesson in those problems, no matter how painful they may be and challenging and inconvenient they may be at the time that those problems come into your life. So I told her it's not about I just have a positive attitude, I'm always smiling. It's not the case. Like I've actually lost a lot of positiveness about, making changes to the city of Baltimore just because of what I looked at as, logically what I thought could be solved. I didn't realize that there's as you know this, and I've learned this from reading your book and discussions with you, that we have technical change and we have adaptive change. Yeah. And people constantly in Baltimore constantly keeping technical change to things that need to be more adaptive type changes. So for me, that's why I say I lost my positiveness towards changing Baltimore, and that because of those reasons. But I stayed in a gracious gratitude mindset, and I told us, and I understand that it's not about what happens to me, is how I handle what happens to me. And I keep the main thing. So I just want to share that a little bit because I think a lot of people, and I'm grateful for having this mindset that I have. That's another part of my gratitude moment, is that I can see that clearly and articulate that, understand that, because years ago, I would have been arguing the point of, no, it's about being positive. That's what the books I read was, positive. And just quickly, I just want to go through this point. I think it's an excellent segue into our discussion today as well, that, as a Black person, we read a lot of those books, and she was saying that she was having a challenge because she believes that people like Deepak Chopra and, of course, Dr. Wayne Dyer, who, she loves those books and with their teachings and their writings. She said she doesn't believe that they had to live in the inner city and deal with the issues that you deal with in the city. And I told her, I said, well, it was Deepak Chopra that once had a quote that said, you can't be positive in a negative environment. So if everything around you is negative, then he even said himself, you can't be positive. You can't walk out the house with trash, shooting, violence, corruption, poor leadership, and say, it's a beautiful day. You know, you have to find the beauty in the fact that you're alive, and then you have options, and that you can begin to make changes for your day as a result. The fact that you have the ability to function and think and move and act. So I just want to add that little story because that was fresh on my mind.
Yeah, I'm glad you did because it really is tied in with what we're going to talk about today, and that it reminds me of the Krishnamurti quote that it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So,
I
yeah,
like that.
yeah, and what we're talking about again is we don't have complete or really any control over what's out there. I mean, we can have some influence once in a while, but in terms of violence and other people's behavior, I can't control it. You can't control it. But what we can control, or at the very least influence, as you say, is how we respond to it and how we view it. So positivity has nothing to do with making believe everything is okay. But I love the move that you made. It's not even about being positive all the time. It's about being grateful for those things that you do have. Because a lot of times, we have all these monoliths out there. We talk about monoliths sometimes, and a lot of times, okay, positive mental attitude and gratitude and love, and we kind of blend them all together as though they're all the same thing, and you just have to have them. And they're all wonderful, but they need to be teased apart, I think, and really looked at specifically. And as you said, it's a lot easier to wake up in a relatively safe environment in a relatively nice home, whether it's an apartment or a condo or wherever it is, and there aren't bullets flying or fires raging or whatever. It's easier to have positive mental attitude in those moments. I think we spoke about once before. I used to always talk to my high school basketball players at halftime. When we're up 20 points at halftime, it's really easy to be rah rah. Let's go out there and 2 more quarters and we got this. But when you're down 20, that's the time you really need that positive attitude and that belief that you can do something. Any fool can be positive when everything is going well.
Absolutely.
So that was the kind of funny lesson, that I tried to convey to them. Right now we're down 15. This is when we need your best. This is when we need you to be positive, to believe in yourselves. And that's a hard lesson because nobody likes being down 15 or 20.
Absolutely. So what is our topic today? What are we going to discuss?
Yeah. So as some people know, we've been talking about healing America's narratives. That's the title of the book that came out last year, subtitled "The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow." And then there's a tag beneath that says "Becoming More Fully Human." And today we're actually, in the 12th chapter, the final chapter of the book. I'm sorry, we're actually in the 11th chapter of the book, where we're presenting some possible resolutions to some of the problems of American Shadow. And the specifics of today's conversation actually come from one of our earlier guests back when we were dealing with chapter 3, which dealt with the fear of the feminine and subjugation of women. We invited, over the course of 3 weeks, 3 women to join us, since you and I decided it probably would be a good idea to have women's voices help the 2 men speak about women's issues. So Trebbe Johnson was one of those, and her book was entitled "Radical Joy for Hard Times: Finding Meaning and Making Beauty in Earth's Broken Places." It's a beautiful book. And one of the stories she told in that book was a true story of a Japanese fisherman whose name was, and I'm going to actually look at the text here so I get the pronunciations right or come close, Susumu Sugawara. And he was out in his boat off the coast of Japan's Oshima Island on March 11th, 2011, when he actually saw the tsunami approaching. He recognized that something different was happening on the horizon. He knew what it was. And he basically held his boat as a friend for 42 years. Like he had his same boat for over 42 years, and he silently bid well to his boat. He figured he was going to die, and he silently bid well to his fellow fishermen. He turned into the wave as it approached, accelerated, and miraculously survived the first primary wave, and then the secondary and tertiary waves that followed. And then he realized he had survived the tsunami. But he just stayed out there for some hours because he could see it, it approached the island, and when it landed, he was sure that there was going to be great devastation and loss. So he just kind of contemplated his own survival. And it wasn't until after dark he began traveling back inland and navigating around the flotsam and the debris and broken boats, pieces of houses, automobiles that were floating out. And then he spent the following weeks ferrying people and supplies back and forth from the island to the mainland, wherever they needed to go. And he did it for free when people couldn't pay him, and he charged a nominal fee when they could. So based on that kind of amazing story, Trebbe, the author of the book, Radical Joy for Hard Times, came up with 4 kind of lessons about being faced with riding waves in hard times, kind of metaphorically speaking. So the first thing she said was, you don't try to flee it, you head right into the thick of it. So you don't deny it. This is real. It's coming my way, and I have to, recognize that. I'm not going to be in denial. The second lesson was that as soon as you rush over it, as soon as it rushes over you, I should say, learn to ride it as best you can. Recognize that this large force is in charge. You can't control it, but you neither fight it nor capitulate to it. You learn to be with it. And you move with it in the way that you feel is most likely to help you survive it, whatever that might be. And she has 2 more lessons. After the onslaught is over, so in the fisherman's case, after the final wave of the tsunami had passed and the sea was relatively calm, take as much time as you need to get your bearings. Like, don't rush into trying to fix everything, because you're not going to be able to. Make sure you're okay. And then make your way back to the familiar shore. Again, speaking metaphorically here. And once you're back there and you're sure you're okay, or okay enough, then you reach out and try to help others. So don't deny it, ride into it, do the best you can to survive it, make sure you're okay, and then try your best to help others. And that was the lesson she took from the story of the fisherman who literally accelerated his boat into the tsunami and lived to tell about it.
That's an excellent story. And I was thinking about the fact that how similar that is into kind of what I've been studying the last couple of weeks, or the last week in particular, around the Stoic philosophy.
Okay.
And it's similar to that context of, you don't run from your problem, you accept the reality of the situation you're in, and then you look to see what can you learn from it, because you want to say that it's happening for a reason, and the reason, that's where the positiveness thinking comes in. The reason is that I'm going to gain something from this, as opposed to I'm losing something as a result of it. And I think that's how we tend to look at most problems, is I'm losing something. Either I'm losing happiness, I'm losing peace of mind. And those things you can control. How you, based on how you respond and how you view it, your happiness and your peace of mind. Like even some folks who've lost houses and lost, jobs. Like recently, talking about losing jobs, 2 big name media personalities lost their jobs. They both were fired from their networks, Don Lemon and Tucker Carlson. And what's interesting is that a lot of people are projecting that Tucker can actually benefit from this. My own personality is going to be like Obi-Wan Kenobi from the Star Wars analogy. Like when Vader finally supposedly killed him, he became even more powerful and became this figure that was even much more influential in Luke's life than he would have been in his physical form. Where now Tucker is not going to be withheld to Fox's governance anymore. He can just take off the gloves and be as outlandish and as he wants to be, and whether he's offensive or not, misogynistic as he wants to be, whatever he is, it's going to appeal to his market. So now, my question for you, with that being said, I think that it is easier for me to see the connection now, using the, as you say, Trebbe's analogy of being on the boat and turning into the wave and focusing on and pushing through it. But my question would be, it's easy for me to see that now because I've gone through things and I see the logic in it. Not only logic, I see the wisdom in it, more importantly.
Yeah.
But for someone who has gained the wisdom, who has read those references, how do you make that shift where you begin to say, I can accept the fact that I'm going into this wave of the tsunami, and I'm going to accept death if it comes. But at the same time, if I make it through it, then I'll be a better person as a result. How do you make that shift in your mind for that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are, I like to say there are three ways that a shift like that happens. And I don't like saying, the 3 things you need to know, or the 10 lessons, to be the best salesperson or whatever. Yeah, I don't really tend to speak that way, but experientially, I believe that we grow through 3 general approaches. One is grace or serendipity, where we just figure something out, it just seems to come to us and we see things differently. Like that's nice when it happens, but waiting around for that is probably not a good idea. A second way we grow is through trauma recovery. When something bad happens and we do the work to get through it with help, we often have a very different perspective shift. And then the third one, which is my preferred approach, is intentional practice. Where if you hear about this, what you just said, and what Trebbe wrote about with this fisherman getting through the hard times, and even though this could kill me, it might not. So I want to, kind of be with it and work with it. You can begin to train your mind to do that. There's a few things that we know for sure that every human being, I think, and I rarely say this, should know. One is you're going to die. And you and I have spoken about that in the past. So whether it's going to be this particular tsunami that kills you, you don't know that, but it's coming at some point. But in terms of getting your mind to the point where this is a terrible thing right now, and we have so many terrible things available to us nowadays, whether it's active shooters, whether it's tornadoes, whether it's floods, fires, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that come at us, and we haven't even mentioned, automobile accidents and major illnesses. So all of us have a lot of things that could be our personal tsunamis, to use the metaphor. And one of the tenets of Buddhist practice is the idea of impermanence, like nothing lasts. And so when in the middle of it, if you understand impermanence, that can be helpful. Oh, this is really scary right now. This is really painful right now. This is really sad, or this is really whatever the emotion happens to be. We know that it will pass, or we will die, in which case it passes in a more permanent way. And that's true whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing. Like my greatest moments of joy and happiness, the downside of impermanence is, this isn't going to last forever ever either. So, I would say, you and I are able to have these types of conversations because we've been doing work on ourselves, reading and practicing for some decades. While it is possible to have a eureka moment, an epiphany, that can happen, and a sudden shift happens. Most of us don't have that, and we can't count on it. So doing the work, who and how do I want to be in the world? I would like to be able to handle these difficult moments. Experiencing them and learning I can get through them is one way, but practicing the idea of impermanence and recognizing that none of my moods, none of my moments are permanent. They come and they go. My thoughts come and go. It all comes and goes. So that's the offering I would make. And if you would ask me that question 35 years ago, I could not have given you that answer. I would have been, whatever, I think I was 33 or something, 35 years ago. It would have been a different answer. I'm not sure what it would have been. I can imagine it, but it took living through loss and paying attention and spending time with my friends on the bookshelf and my actual living human friends as well to continue to learn how to be increasingly more human. So I don't know a finger snapping way to do it, but grace, serendipity, recovery through trauma, and intentional practice are three ways that I do know it can happen. Waiting around for grace, you might be waiting for a long time. Trauma, I think most of us would agree if we could avoid it, we would choose to. So intentional practice seems the way to go, committing to working on what I want to develop in myself.
That's why I see such, obvious the failure in our public education as we grew up, because it doesn't prepare us for dealing with life in this context. Like, again, there's 4 virtues that I've learned that studying the Stoic that, again, that resonates with exactly what you're saying as far as surviving the tsunami. It's courage, wisdom, moderation, and justice, right? So you got to first have that courage to say, okay, I'm not going to play the victim role. I'm going to head right on into this. Yeah. Then the wisdom to know that I have competence. I've survived similar things in the past, maybe not this level, but I've been able to survive. So I know it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to kill me. I'm not going to die from it, or or it may kill me, but at least in the mindset, I'm going to go out the best I possibly can. And see, for me, I think and dealing with other folks who haven't made that shift, as I talked about before. See, the thing you said that I think was important is that you wanted to put yourself on the path to become more fully human. That was a desire, there's an intentionality, that was a goal. And that to me is the first step, is saying that, okay, I might not know exactly how to solve the tsunami that I'm in right now, but I do want to become a better person. I do want to get through this. And what I see around my community, unfortunately, and I just talk about my community because that's kind of what I deal with on a daily basis, and shifting myself away from folks like that. I call it negative energy. That to me is that negative energy, because people have lost hope. Yeah. And when you lost hope, again, going back to Star Wars analogy, I remember the very first Star Wars that came out, it was called The New Hope. So again, that hope, I'm a big, huge Star Wars fan. I watched Star Wars when I was 7. That's when it came out in 1977. And I've always been a Star Wars fan. And I love, as Joseph Campbell talks about, you see it so fully in George Lucas's telling of Star Wars, the hero's journey. Yeah. And you see that the empire is so big and so powerful. And it's funny when you begin to, just as a side note, talk about, capitalism and how the empire has all these new toys. And they always have like the greatest toys. It's just, endless robots, endless droids, massive superstations, massive Star Destroyers, and the rebels are just barely like scraping by, but they're always able to persevere because they have hope, right? Yeah. And they even say that, and force is more like faith, may the faith be with you. So I say all that to say is, but the thing about it, even though the hero is reluctant to make that journey, and Joseph Campbell talks about that in the hero's journey, that you're normally reluctant to make that journey or think that you want to go that path, I still want to figure out what does it take to get folks to say that I know I'm in a bad situation, I know I'm in a bad environment, I know that I'm have trauma I'm dealing with, whether it's parents on drugs, parents in prison, parents may be deceased, siblings in drugs, sibling deceased, siblings in prison, whatever the situation may be, but still want to be better. That's what I always want to get to, because that's the person who I look to connect with, and that's the person who I look to provide my service for, is the person who wants it, as opposed to just saying that I want to help everybody because I know this knowledge is here, and I have it in my heart, and I'm a person who wants to be a servant leader, and I want to be of service. I've shifted to only want to be of service to others. I mean, to folks who want that, who are looking, the person who wants to get through that tsunami, as opposed to a person who's going to cry and say, why I'm on this boat, why the tsunami is coming at this time of my life. So my question now with that context is, am I walking away from being less fully human if I only want to choose to work with certain people as opposed to fully embracing my servitude towards everyone that may need it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know that there's a right answer to that question. I'll give you my sense of it. So one of the things that Kent is my business partner, colleague, friend, who we came up with the Fully Human program. And one thing we never do is we don't define it. So we don't say, this is what it means to be fully human. We let people explore it. So my sense of the question you asked is your self-inquiry around that. So, am I being fully human if I direct my attention only to those, or mostly to those people who have exhibited a desire to receive my help and to improve themselves, and I don't give as much attention or any attention to those who don't seem to want that yet? So the inquiry itself, I would say, is part of what it means to be fully human. Because if we're going to be fully human, it doesn't say, we're not saying completely positive human. We're saying fully human. And if I'm fully human, I have some wonderful traits. I have some not so wonderful traits. I have a shadow part of myself. So my take on your question is, just that you ask that question means that you have a lot of the fully human energy, because you're aware of the question. And I'm going to reframe the question and put it in a kind of really blunt, unskillful way. So would you, and not that you need to answer this because you know the answer. So do I want to spend time every day as a martyr trying to convince people of something that I think is good for them, but they don't really want? Or would I rather spend my day trying to convince people or help people with that same thing with the people who actually do want it, who are willing to accept the help? So, my tagline on my business card is alleviating unnecessary suffering, which is a common phrase in Buddhism. But then I added, for the willing. I don't work with, I never try to force somebody to work with me. Like, hey, come here, I want to coach you, and here's what it costs. Like, it doesn't work, obviously. But I would say that's working with those people whom you can best serve is part of being fully human, and spending less of your life energy with those who don't yet want what you offer makes perfect, fully human sense. And I would add one thing to it, and this is really just an out loud thinking process for me. As you give more and more attention to those who want what you're offering, and they receive it and become increasingly more fully human, and they move out into the world in whatever work they're going to be doing, those other folks might begin to see them and recognize their humanity or their joy or their success or whatever it is, and begin to get interested in, oh, what is it that guy King was trying to sell me on 2 years ago and wanted to, he was talking to me about? They might begin to see the results of the people who wanted it and say, well, maybe I need to reach out to him because I think I'm interested now. So the question is definitely a fully human question. The concern, am I being selfish if I work with the people who most want what I offer? I mean, the marketing experts, and I'm not one of them, would say, no, you're being strategic, and that's the only people you should be working with. Now, I don't know if that's always correct, because sometimes there are people who really need help, who for a lot of reasons don't recognize it, and we can really help them and benefit them. But trying to force something on someone who's not willing to receive it can work at times, and it can also be a waste of time and energy for both parties. So it's a real delicate response, I think, and it's a great question. I think that's one of the questions that Rilke was talking about. Was don't ask for the answers that could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. The point is, live the questions now. So that's a great question to live with, I think. And I know I struggled with it when I began coaching. When I was a Catholic school teacher, I made a little bit of money every 2 weeks, and I just went to work. It was easy. When I became a coach and I had to get clients, I had to decide, well, how much do I charge, and am I willing to do it for a really little bit of money, which isn't going to really help me pay my bills, or do I need to not work with some people who can't afford it? So I had to find the sweet spot there and do some pro bono work and have a sliding scale, but still take care of myself. So that's it. I think all of that type of stuff is tied in with the question, am I a bad person? I'm being facetious when I say that, because based on our conversations, neither one of us, I think, qualifies as a bad person.
Right.
But we still want to pay attention to that inquiry because it keeps us honest. So I think it's a really important question that there's not one final answer to. Took me 5 minutes to say that.
And I think to that, to answer that question as well, I think it comes down to age. I think that when you're young and you're in your 20s and your 30s and you start to acquire information and knowledge, and you are a person who receives the energy of servitude, you want to serve everybody. You believe you can change the world, but then when you get to be, if you live to be, in your 40s and 50s, you begin to realize that there's not such a thing as saving the world. If I can save one person, I've made a difference. You start to scale back that ambitious goal of saving everybody, because you just realize that, it's been a lot of famous people who said, you lose your mind if you try to make everybody happy. Because you realize just because we're human beings and we were given the gifts. Stephen R. Covey talks about the birth gifts, the birth gift of decision, choice. And because we have that birth gift, that's a gift and a curse, because we can choose to make the right decisions, and then we can also choose to make the wrong decisions, right? And you see that happen every single day and how people are living. And then you look at the climate and the environment that we live in today's world, where there's media, and the whole goal behind media now is to be in your face 24 hours, 7 days a week. And everything you do, you're going to have some kind of notification, some kind of update, something you hear, be concerned about this, be worried about this. I want your attention over here. Everyone's vying for your attention, that you have to be even more strategic nowadays to now be more focused on what's important to you, because if not, then you got, again, we've said this on many podcasts before, either you're living your plan or you're falling into someone else's plan. And I say all that because that's the battle that I have, is turning down that noise. And I look at it as noise of, let me save everybody. Like I used to be, when I moved to Baltimore, I was so interested in going to every community meeting I can go to. Let me go to the community, let me get invested in the community, let me learn the mores, nuances of how people think and how people operate, because that's the data I want. I'm always data driven, data cognitive of data and aware of data being out there, and data teaches us so much. Now I get invited to these community conversations, and I already know what they're going to say. I know what people are going to complain about. I know, and some folks don't know better. Some folks do want to make change, but it's kind of like dealing with that person who, is a cigarette smoker. And I'm not judging anyone. Like I tell folks, I've learned that I don't judge the individual, I judge your behavior. So it's like saying, I want to stop smoking, but I want to do it tomorrow. So right now I'm going to smoke this cigarette. I want to, because it makes me feel good. I want to put that off, and you procrastinate. And then you realize the doctor tells you that you have to change. You need to stop smoking immediately. If you smoke anymore, then you may die in 6 months. And some people can use that as a wake-up call, that tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his book, The Tipping Point. So now I say all that to say is that for me, it has taken me the last 3 years, but I've gotten comfortable with only wanting to build and connect. And that's my whole movement I advocate now, is connecting with intent, is connecting with people who you are in line with, because the conversations go so well. Like, for example, I just shared this with you. Yesterday, I spoke to a woman who I interviewed on my podcast, who's a coach, and she's someone who teaches mastermind sessions. Mm-hmm. And I had interviewed her before. I met her through my process of meeting folks on LinkedIn and through the conscious leadership groups that I'm involved in. And we instantly connected just based off her outlook at life. Like she said, she gets up every morning. I asked, one of the key questions I ask on my podcast is, what are some of the daily practices you do to kind of position you or get your mind right to deal with the onslaught that the day is going to come? Because we all know it's coming. The negative information is coming, like almost like a small tsunami, depending on where a person is in their lives. It could be a large tsunami, but it's coming. And she said, I get up every day, and this is a woman who's in her 60s. She says, I get up and I walk every day. And that 40-minute, 50-minute walk sets my mind. It gets my mind now, when my mind is fine-tuned to deal with and stay focused and kind of stay targeted through the tsunami. So it's like a horse with the blinders on. I can only see right in front of me. I'm not looking. I don't even want to see around me, So and then yesterday we had a conversation, and it was supposed to be a 15-minute phone call, and ended up being an hour phone call. And it went so fast because the alignment was there. We were just clicking. It was just like, wow, let's share this point. And it felt good. Like talking with you, it feels good. An hour goes by so fast. And it's funny when you're talking to someone who you're not in alignment with, and a conversation can be a 5-minute conversation, and you're ready to get out of there. You're ready to get away from it as quickly as possible. It's going on too long in your mind, right? Yeah. So for me, that is the journey I'm on. That's, to me, is a path I choose to feel comfortable with, is choosing and being grateful for those moments where I can talk to someone like you who I'm in alignment with and have a wonderful conversation, as opposed to someone who may even be a family member, who may be blood, and I don't even want to talk to them for 2 minutes. And I'm comfortable making that choice. And so that to me was the biggest, I would say, shift in my mindset and me as a person and my growth. Like my growth spurt that you have as a child, you have physical growth spurt. This is my mental growth spurt, my emotional growth spurt, and my spiritual growth spurt is being able to be comfortable with the fact that I don't want to talk to you, and I'm not going to feel guilty about it at all.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I love the way you began, especially with the saving the world thing. I got there and saved the world. One of the guys I learned some from early on, not that early, but in the 90s, was a guy named Rick Jarrow, who was actually a religion professor at Vassar College. He's since retired. But he wrote a book in the 90s called Creating the Work You Love. It was one of the first books out there about really not just going to a job somewhere, but creating the work and the life that you really want. And he's traveled back and forth to India numerous times to study. He teaches comparative religion, so he teaches across Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, etc. And when he first went to India, this is one of the great stories he told me. He said, they'd sit down in front of the teacher, and they would always ask the Western students, well, why are you here? And so he said, I want to change the world. And so the teacher looked at him and said, the only thing the world needs saving from is people like you who think they can change the world. So he told that story probably 1998 or 99. I heard that story. I just laughed out loud, but it's a great point.
It is.
Yeah, you're not going to save the world, but you can help people, you can serve people, and if enough of us do that, perhaps the world will be saved. But saving the world that's a big job. It's exhausting.
It is. It's like, in becoming a dog owner, I still watch dog videos so I can become much more understanding about psychology of dogs and training and how other people who have dogs and who have had dogs, just so I don't take what my dog does and be personal. And that has really been helpful to realize that's going to be a dog's behavior. A dog's going to do those things. It's not just doing it to me, so I can't just come at her and want to discipline her for that reason. And it's helped me a lot, watch these videos. But I use an analogy because I see the same thing with people. And that's why people, I realize, appreciate dogs so much. It's because dogs show gratitude towards you. They seem grateful. They have unconditional love. And then they forget, you can sit here and yell at your dog and kick your dog out the house, and then literally 20 minutes later, the dog has forgot about that, and the dog is just happy that you now want to play fetch. And it's in that moment right there that you and the dog are enjoying each other's company. The dog is not sitting like, well, 20 minutes ago you kicked me out. I don't want to play fetch right now, and I have to deal with that emotional issue,
Yeah.
And that to me is what I'm learning from nature, and that's what people say. Like you talk about someone like when you read about Henry David Thoreau and how they wanted to get away, like they get so much knowledge and so much wisdom. I just gotta go out and go in a cabin and get away from everybody and just be around nature. And I don't mind solitude. I don't mind just being away from people, because people can, if you allow them to, this is something that T.D. Jakes and as well as Joel Osteen said, stop giving people the opportunity to rent space in your head with their negative energy.
Yeah.
And it was funny. It's like you walk out the door and someone, and literally, I don't know your environment you're in, but I know if I walk out my door, literally, I can have someone I can just stand in my doorway actually, and someone will walk up and say, I got something negative to hand you. And they're not literally saying that, but that's with their actions and their energy they're bringing me. They literally say, I got something negative to give you. You want something negative? I got something negative to give you. And it got to be, no, let me, hold up the shield of justice, so to speak, and block that and prohibit you from entering my mind. But then the next token is, now let me feed my mind the right positive information, right? And that's why I say, quickly, I want to make this point again, whether it was, and we talked about this on many occasions, but it's funny. I literally, it's certain people who I watch on a podcast from their business acumen, their business competence that I learn from. I said, wow, this person is a very successful business person. They've been able to build a company, hire thousands of people, and make millions of dollars in a certain amount of time frame. But then I listen to other podcasts they do where they're talking about their politics and how they can be either so left or so right that I realized, and that's where you literally the expression comes out. You can't throw the baby with the bad water. You can't throw the baby out with the bath water, because I've learned early on, no matter how great a person who I may believe a person may be, there's always going to be somebody. To your point earlier, where you talk about being fully human, we're still human. There's going to be elements that I don't want from this person. I don't want this part of you, but I do want that part of you, right? And then being able to make that decision and being able to make a discernment, to me, is also where wisdom comes into play at this stage of my life.
Yeah, I love that. So because we're just, if we are fully human, I mean, I haven't met the perfect person yet that's always makes me feel okay and is always on their best behavior, and I know he's not there when I look in the mirror either. So it's just
Right.
understanding that the world doesn't live up to our expectations. I was speaking to a younger guy a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about his dating issues. And he lives in a pretty big city, and he was saying, and he's a very thoughtful, very intelligent. He's a really good human being. But he was saying that his current girlfriend, like, she's not good in conversation. She doesn't initiate much conversation, and he likes conversation, so he's really frustrated by that. And then he basically said that every woman in blank city, I'm not going to say the city because I don't want to identify him in any way, but it's a city that everybody would recognize in the U.S. He said they're all the same. He said none of them are any good at conversations. They're around my age, and they're all just not good at conversation. So I asked him, I said, well, every woman? I said, are you sure that you just didn't get to that right one yet? He goes, no, and he got really kind of charged around it. So I didn't laugh about it. I just said, well, do you think there's any contribution that you're making to this interaction? Because if it was with one woman or maybe two, okay, all right, so you haven't bumped into the right one yet. But all of the women in this city that you've met are like the same. So we were able to have a good conversation around it. But I said, he said, don't blame me. I said, I'm not blaming you, but I'm suggesting that maybe you look within to see if there's some part of you that thinks women should be able to behave in a certain way because of your conversation preferences. But we're all in the soup together. It's just, it's really an interesting conversation, the larger conversation with humans.
What I'm amazed about nowadays is how anyone who I can, at least this is just my opinion, how anyone who consider themselves to be wise can either be fully left or fully right. Like to be to the extreme of either, to me nowadays, just like, I don't see how you can do that, because you can see the hypocrisy from both extremes. You see the ambiguity. I mean, you can see some value in some of the conservative views. I see value, and I see some value in some of the liberal views, but I don't see that as the only answer, and that has to be the only way. Nor do I see the conservative views it's the only answer, and it has to be the only way. It's like there has to be a middle ground, and that's why I believe, as we talk about surviving tsunami, that I think the political tsunami that I see down the road is just getting worse and worse.
Yeah,
it's like I don't see it getting any better. It's like everyone is doubling down in their trenches. It's like it's like an arms race. Who can say the most divisive, hurtful things about each other, calling each other a liar, trying to lock each other up for crimes, and now becomes the goal and the focus. And it's like, at the end of the day, the people suffer because we have lack of governance.
Yeah.
So the government is no longer, some people would argue that it hasn't ever, but at least it was better at managing the situation for us. It's like, if we don't have something like a pandemic where everybody can throw away their political ideologies for a minute and just kind of focus on, we got to survive, right? So I got, whether you're Democrat or Republican, I can have you in my house because, even though I'm a staunch Republican, I'm a staunch Democrat, because you might get me sick. I just got to survive. And we got to all come together to make that work. Then once that passes, then it's back to, oh yeah, now I remember I don't like you.
Yeah.
And now, as we get near the top of the hour with our discussion, that's why I want to ask, what are some of the steps you can say that you can help people begin to prepare for surviving the tsunami?
Yeah. So the side of me wants to make a quick comment on what you just said, because it was that looking left and right and seeing the dignities and disasters of both, and not being just locked in one or the other. That's really a perfect example of adult development, where if I'm just looking through a conservative lens, everything is liberal, and that's the bad people. And the conservatives are right, they're the good people. If I'm only looking through a strictly liberal, especially far left or far right, but a liberal lens, everything is more conservative than me, and that's bad. But when I can step back and look at, this is what you just said perfectly, I can look at what I used to look through. So now I can see extreme liberalism as something I can see. It's not no longer my lenses, it's something I'm looking at. And I can see extreme conservatism, no longer my lens on the right, looking at it. That's a developmental move that allows us to say, oh, there's some good things there and some good things there. And that's why more and more adults are leaving both parties. But the way you described it was a perfect example of that subject object move for development. So I
Right.
just wanted to point to that, which I love that. So to your question, the easiest way to begin to develop the skills of moving through tsunami is to begin with spilt milk or leaky faucet. So when there's not that much fluid coming your way, to begin to practice dealing with something that's upsetting. That it's not really dangerous, but it's annoying. So the old adage of "don't cry over spilt milk" is actually useful in some ways. So I can practice if the faucet is leaking and it's a little drop at a time, and the sound of that is annoying to me. I can kind of say, okay, I'm not going to run away from that. What could I do? Oh, maybe I can either call a plumber or, better yet, learn how to fix a faucet myself. If I spill something, rather than running away and leaving it spilt, I can say, oh, what might be a good resolution to this mess? Oh, I could clean it up, even though it's going to take me 4.5 minutes maybe to do it. But then it'll be cleaned up and I'll feel better because the mess is no longer there. So practice with little things, little annoyances, little inconveniences, build the muscle that allows you, me, us to be resilient when big difficult things happen. Gives us the courage to face them and the resilience to recover from them. But start small. That's the way to practice anything, really. What's the little thing that really annoys you, that gets in the way? Start navigating. That's your mini tsunami practice. Face it, navigate it skillfully, and then if somebody else is suffering from the same thing, if they're being annoyed by the drippy faucet, right, maybe collaborate. You know how to fix this? No. You want to try to figure it out together? So, involving others. So that's I think the entry way to navigating, to preparing to navigate the real metaphorical tsunami, the big thing in life that really challenges us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And to that point, I want to add this little point, of my growth as well. Like 2 or 3 years ago, I used to hate when something that was racially targeted to black folks, police killing unarmed black men, and then watching sports and then watching the players come out and take a stance, T-shirts, make statements. And what would bother me would be how folks would be so insensitive to say, just shut up and dribble, just shut up and play. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to see that when I watch sports. And I'd be like, how dare they say that, where it's so much in my face as a black man, I can't escape it. But now, I had to say that when I watch sports, I do try to escape some of the political craziness that I see in the everyday world, so I can see some of the value of the argument now. Because even I don't judge the athletes for doing it. I understand why they're doing it, but by the same token, if you're watching a movie or you're watching sports, you kind of want to escape for a moment that whatever the climate you're in, the environment, whether it's political, whether it's racial, whether it's dealing with gender pay gap, whatever the issue that's dominating your mental space, and you want to escape, you can't escape when it transcends into the things you look to escape with.
Yeah.
And so to your point about that and that made me think about that when you talked about that faucet dripping. And see, for me, that's that faucet dripping in the background. And then I say, okay, well, I'm gonna go downstairs because I want to escape that. I can't cap the upstairs pipe that's dripping. So let me go downstairs to escape that dripping. It's driving me insane. And then the minute I sit downstairs and try to get some peace, and I try to do something else, I hear it dripping downstairs, and it's like, wow, I didn't stop the problem. I tried to escape the problem, and maybe that might be what it is. We can't escape it. We gotta dive right into the tsunami and try to figure out how do I survive within the tsunami instead of trying to turn and avoid it, because I'm not going to escape it right now.
Yeah, I love the example of the athletes making, taking a knee or, putting certain words on their jerseys or whatever, because that's an example of these exquisitely gifted athletes being fully human. Oh, I'm not just a jock. I care about the social issue or whatever it happens to be as well. So I'm going to do this as part of my work day. I'm going to change what I wear. I'm going to change my posture, whatever it happens to be. And as you said, we don't want to be reminded of things that make us uncomfortable. But does anybody have the right to say, you're not allowed to have an opinion on that? You're a basketball player or a baseball player or a football player, whatever. So it's that whole fully human thing. It's everybody's opportunity to be fully human, not just some people. So that's a good example. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Now, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoy these conversations, like I said, because it gives me a chance to really learn some things. Your book has been a wonderful tool, but it's a rare opportunity to get a chance to discuss a book to the extent that we are, and pull out different pieces of it and have the discussion. I don't get to do that with most books that I read. Yeah. And that's why it's important to read a book multiple times. They say, it's not that you learn something new, you learn something new about yourself, the multiple readings. Because you get more conscious and you awaken and become more open to information. You're not fighting the writer anymore. You're not saying, oh, that's not true. I don't necessarily agree with that. You kind of, the second or third reading, you're more open to accepting the ideals and what the concept this person is laying out. So now, with that being said, we've reached a part of the show where we want to give examples of who we believe are folks who, whether they're past or present, exhibit the qualities that we're advocating for becoming fully human. And so, you have anyone in mind? You want to go first?
Yeah, it didn't occur to me till earlier in the conversation, but I'm going to name the author that, and our previous guest on this podcast, Trebbe Johnson, who I met in 1998 out I did a vision quest in Utah, Canyonlands, and she was one of the co-guides that was helping me pursue what I was pursuing. And we've, been in touch in various ways over the years, but during COVID, and Trebbe is a few years older than I am, so she's in her early 70s, but during COVID, she lost her husband, not to COVID, but during that time, it was a return of a cancer that he had. And, I mentioned the book, Radical Joy for Hard Times, which is based on a program that she's developed. It's all over the world right now. It's not a for-profit endeavor. It's a not-for-profit thing. But she has a new book out called Fierce Consciousness. And she really faces the loss of her husband, so the personal loss there, and how she navigated that. But her larger perspective is the fierce consciousness necessary as the planet continues to deteriorate. And it really is. I mean, You and I don't speak about that in a lot of detail, but she does. And she uses phrases like Earth hospice, like how we need to be as the planet is dying. So there's a certain fierceness, there's this wisdom and compassion that I find in Trebbe in person, but also in her work, that I think is she's an exemplar for being fully human, and especially because she talks about her own stuff too when she writes. Like she doesn't put herself out there as this like perfect human being. So she talks about her own stuckness in certain areas and her own habits. So I would say Trebbe Johnson is my fully human exemplar.
Great choice. I really enjoyed the conversation that we had with Trebbe,
Yeah.
and discuss her work today has definitely been helpful going forward. So I appreciate that. I'm going to choose an author as well, and mine would be he's author, actor, producer, multiple different things he's great at, and that's why I really admire the gentleman. And his life is an example of what I look to. I want to make this point why I talk about him real quick is that I don't know if you know a comedian by the name of Chelsea Handler. Chelsea
Oh
Handler.
yeah.
Well, she had a show on Netflix. And there's one thing that she did in her show that I really loved, and I said I want to emulate. She would have every now and then she would have dinner at her house, and she would invite different celebrities, whatever they were great at, authors, politicians, whatever, to her house and have like a meal. And so it'd be about 5 or 6 people, and they would break bread and they would have discussions. I thought that was just a wonderful idea. And so as a result, I've always said I would love to have. So when I see certain people I admire, I say I would love to have dinner with this individual and just really pick their brain, have a discussion. And this gentleman who I'm going to pick for my fully human example is such a person I would love to meet in person. Hopefully one day I will. And that's Matthew McConaughey.
Okay. Yeah.
And he wrote a book called Green Light or Green Lights, which is a wonderful book. And then the green lights are those points in your life where you see it's obviously it's ready for me to go, being a green light. I need to go, something positive happening. But it also could be something negative because just because you can go doesn't also mean you should, right? Go across the intersection, somebody else is running a red light. You can have accidents. So you got to be mindful of that and navigate that. But anyway, and listening to him, and you look at his life, he's a gentleman who, pretty much fits the ideal perfect man that society has created. He's a white man who's over 6 foot tall. He's handsome. He is a Brazilian woman who I'm jealous of. There's all these. He's a great actor, wonderful voice, but he's very humble. He's a very kind person through all that. Instead of him being very arrogant and very narcissistic, he's the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. And you can see when you read his book, he talks about the pain he has to go through and the way he chooses his movies. He's very strategic, but at the same time, he's a servant leader. And he wants to run for politics, which I think would be a bad idea. I think politics in our country brings out the worst in people than it does the best, because you have to learn how to play that game. Yeah. But anyway, I choose him because I listened to an interview of him recently. I just really loved how he talked about going through making choices in his life and pulling back from things that, even though it's it may be like he doesn't want a lot of recognition. He chooses this role to be very, can I live with this character and watch this later on in my life? Can my kids watch this character, and what can we learn from it? He chooses his roles based on that, not based on how much money I'm going to make from this role. I can care less of what impact this character has. So to me, that's someone who I admire. That's someone who I definitely will love to break bread with. That's my example today of someone who I believe is fully human.
Yeah, great. I mean, I always want to say, all right, because I can't do his voice, but I know he has a reputation for saying that.
Yeah. He talks about that in his book, how they came about the creation of that as well. Just a wonderful guy. Yeah. Well, Reggie, again, thank you for choosing a wonderful topic. Again, for writing the book that you've written, for always been present, always been attend with your energy, and be willing to be a servant leader and share your information. And again, choosing to write the kind of book you've written as opposed to something that's going to make you money and just only focus on yourself, but being mindful of your impact in the world. So thank you for constantly being that person.
You're welcome. Thank you for continuing these conversations. And just quick end comment. I didn't write the book not to make money because it would be good if it did, but it wasn't my intention. That wasn't the primary reason I wrote it.
That's what I mean. That wasn't the only reason you wrote the book.
Right.
You didn't write, but if you make money as a result from it, then great. You appreciate that.
Yeah.
So definitely thank you for that, and thank you, listening audience, again for listening to another show, the Fully Human Podcast, which do each Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can connect with us and follow us on Facebook, and if you like what we're saying, you have comments, and we encourage engagement. We want to learn from you because, again, we're exploring what it means to be fully human. We don't have the answers, but we're just committed to the process of the journey. So thank you all. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., I wish everyone a blessed and productive week.